Well, welcome to the Dad Nation podcast, where men go from good to great in their life and in their love. Now more than ever, our world needs strong, courageous, and compassionate men, because we believe that when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. You see, this movement is called Dad Nation, but ultimately this is for the wives, the children, and the generations to come, because we believe that every wife and child deserves a father who is pursuing greatness. I am your host, Mitchell Osman, and I'm so grateful and I'm humbled that you've chosen to spend your most precious resource, which is your time, with me today. Listen, it's not lost on me that you give me 60 minutes of your time every week to listen. That is an incredible gift, so I'm really thankful for it. So last week we had a powerful conversation with Dr. Nate Klemp, who is an author and a marriage expert. And if you're listening to this right now and you haven't listened to the last episode, episode number 9, then I'd suggest you go back and listen to that one and then tune into this one, okay? Because this week I'm going to just be building off of some of the things that we talked about last week. It inspired me to go into depth on some different things. So today we're going to be talking about fighting in marriage, right? How to fight fair and how to find resolution when you don't, how to make amends with your wife. We're going to get super practical. I'm going to give you lots of tools that you can implement, guides for you to use. I'm going to give you 2 frameworks that you can use when you feel your blood pressure rising so you can keep your cool. And I'm going to give you 3 practical ways to resolve conflict if it did kind of blow up. And then, of course, I'm going to give you another bonus tool at the end of the episode that I think is going to be super helpful. Last week, Dr. Nate talked about some really great things like contribution. And he talked about having these micro moments of contribution in your relationship. He talked about appreciation, and he talked about revealing, getting clear on values as a couple. We talked about this idea of having a life report card. And we're also going to talk a little bit about values. And I'm going to give you something called a core values discovery tool that you can take and assess, do your own assessment, and then you can learn and use this with your wife as well, so you can get on the same page with what your core values are. And so you can try to eliminate some conflict that you might be having, or at least have it in a more healthy way. All right, so speaking of conflict, the first thing I want to state right off the bat is that conflict is normal, okay? I would even say conflict is healthy. It's important. And in fact, I would probably question any relationship that doesn't have any conflict, because we are human beings. We're not robots, right? We have needs. We get disappointed. We hurt each other unintentionally. But it's through this tension and conflict that we learn about one another's needs. It's through conflict and tension that we learn how to communicate well, how to love one another more effectively, and so on and so forth. However, problems do come up when we don't fight fair and we let things escalate to the point of blowing up. When I talk about not fighting fair, I'm talking about yelling at one another, name calling, threatening, storming off and slamming the door. These are all examples of things that are not helpful, and they're totally avoidable. So we are going to talk about this conflict. We're going to talk about what triggers conflict. We're going to talk about how to keep your cool, how to resolve conflict when it happens, and how to apologize to each other effectively. Okay. So number 1, or one of the biggest reasons that we experience conflict with our spouses, is because we have clashing core values. Okay. Clashing core values. And so if you don't know what that is, well, the most basic definition of values is that they are a set of beliefs or opinions that influence how you live your life. They are ideas that are important to you and personally characterize who you are as an individual. Values play an important role in shaping how you respond to situations and how you set goals. And the thing is about values is everyone's set of core values is unique, and they're influenced by your life experiences. Psychologists also recognize that it's important to stay conscious of your values throughout your life, because they can change as your career and your personal life develops. So these things, these core values that we have, they're like foundational to what we believe. Now, why do we get so upset when our values clash, especially with our spouses or our other, key relationships in our lives? And it's because you have connected with your values so strongly over the course of your life that it's become a part of your identity, which cements your beliefs to the point where they are so strong, psychologically, you actually believe that everyone should believe these same things and live the same way, even if you have no merit for thinking that. You just have this real strong conviction and feeling that they should be living by the same principles, that they should have the same values. And it comes from an egoic mindset, which is really a mindset of thinking, I am the center. I'm the center of what I believe. I'm the center of what's important. And everyone thinks this way to a certain extent, unless they've had like extensive training in mindfulness. So if you're listening and you're already starting to think, man, I've gotten upset when my values have been crossed. It's okay. It's normal. Listen, we've all been there. The vast majority of people have core values and get frustrated when they are rubbed the wrong way. And so this is where a lot of our anger comes from. It's the belief that you are right, because the ego always needs to be right. It's just how it works. And so when you think about it, if there is a principle or belief that you hold, that you believe deeply in, and that you have your identity and your life experiences wrapped around, and that principle or belief gets challenged or questioned, it's a potent recipe for conflict, not just with your spouse, but with anybody. And like I said, we know that clashing values is one of the leading causes of conflicts in relationships. And I certainly know it was for me in my marriage. So I want to give you a little example of a time in my marriage when we had our values crossed and we offended each other and had some conflict to work through. So some of my values are career, finances, integrity, work ethic, your word. These are fairly common values for men. My wife's values are relationships, family, empathy, love. So when we first got married, I was working 3 part-time jobs trying to make ends meet. My wife was a full-time student, and she was picking up some casual shifts, doing some different things to try and to pitch in and help out. We were just barely making it. And there were a couple scenarios where she had passed up on a couple shifts at work in order to be with her friends because something had come up that was important to her. And of course, being newly married, we didn't have this conversation about values. And so all I was thinking about was myself. All I was thinking about was what was important to me. And so I couldn't help but think, here I am working as hard as I can, and you're passing up shifts in order to hang out with your girlfriends, right? Of course, if I was only considering what my foundational beliefs are, then it makes sense that I would be upset. But understanding that some of her core values are relationships, friendships, love, empathy, and mine are career, finances, work ethic, you could see how that would cause some problems, because I fundamentally could not wrap my head around why you wouldn't prioritize work, finances, etc. And this actually became a bit of a recurring point of conflict and tension that we didn't even really resolve until we started seeing a therapist at one point in our marriage. And one of the first things he did was walk us through an assessment tool to discover what our core values were. And then all of a sudden it made sense as to why I was getting so agitated and why she was getting so frustrated. Because on the flip side, she also kind of felt like I was being a robot, that I didn't care about people, that I didn't care about relationships, that all I wanted to do was hustle and grind and make money. And so that was also like she couldn't wrap her head around that as well. So we were just constantly clashing. And the beautiful thing about core values is by taking inventory of your values, you can bring awareness to what you stand for and how you'd like to show up in your life. So every time your wife does something that crosses a line or rubs against your core values or beliefs, you're going to feel disrespected. You're going to feel uncared for. You're going to get frustrated and angry. And unless you know what those core values are, it's really hard to pinpoint why you're so upset. And no doubt if you're married or you've been in a long-term relationship, you know what that feels like. You're like angry or frustrated and you can't quite put your finger on what it is. Well, this is going to help you put your finger exactly on what it is, okay? This type of conflict has more of an edge, more of a bite than your regular normal conflicts. And it's important. It's essential that we understand one another's values so that we know how to support and empower one another and not accidentally disrespect or offend our spouses. Because 99% of the time, this is not intentional. This all happens with the best of intentions. This happens totally unintentionally, but by understanding our values, we can see this coming from a distance and we can address it when it comes up. So the next question is going to be, how do I know what my core values are? Well, that's a great question. So I'm going to give you a free gift today called the Core Values Discovery Tool. So there's a link to this PDF in the show notes, and it's called Reflections and Resources. And I want you to click that link and download the tool. There's going to be a few different documents from today's conversation, but the one that I want you to pay attention to in this section is your Core Values Discovery Tool, like I said. And I want you to look at this list and basically find what connects with you on the deepest level. So think about A, what you're most passionate about, or B, what would offend you the most if this thing was disrespected or disregarded. Okay, so out of this list, I want you to go through them and I want you to highlight or circle the top words that resonate the most with you. And then after you circle all the ones that you kind of feel in your gut, I want you to take those new list of values and I want you to rate them from 1 to 10, okay? You're probably going to find, 10 or 15 of those. Then I want you to make a new list and I want you to carry over the values that were of 8 or more of importance to you, okay? And ideally, you're going to get this down to like a list of 5 values. All of these are like of 8 or more importance. And on that scale of 1 to 10, if 1 meant this is not important to me at all, i.e. I don't care about it, and then giving it a 10 would mean this means everything to me. All right, like I could not live without this, or I firmly hold conviction about this thing. And so from that list, you're going to have your 5 top core values. And now this is just a list I'm giving. If you just do a Google search of like top list of core values, you can find it on the internet. And if you can find a different list if you want to. This is just the list that I've generated. So take that, do the exercise, find your top values and give this to your wife and get her to find her top values and see if you have any overlapping, right? Now, if you have that list, now if you were to think back to some of the most epic fights you've had in your relationship, there's a high probability that you were triggered or offended because she did or said something that either clashed with those values or disregarded one of them. And like I said before, 99% of the time, this is totally unintentional. But if you're crystal clear on what your values are, when someone starts to unintentionally stomp on those values, you can see it coming. You can identify it in the moment and you can just acknowledge that, okay, I'm feeling this way because they're coming against something that maybe I feel super passionate about. And so I just need to take a step back and address those feelings calmly before things start popping off and blowing up. All right? So use that core values tool to discover what your core values are. Get your wife to do it as well. Have that conversation. What do we have any similar values, or what values are different? Over in the past experience of our relationship, where were times that we had fights, and now that looking back, you can see that there was a clash in your values. Okay, so that's a really good tip for helping you understand where conflict might come from. Hey, real quick, we're going to get back to the episode, but I want to give you a free gift today. So if you're here and you're listening to this and you have been having a hard time in your marriage, maybe you and your wife just feel like really great roommates. You haven't had fun in a long time. You're just kind of getting caught up in chores and the to-do list and dropping the kids off and picking them up. I've got something called the Roommate Remedy, which is a free PDF. It's a guide for you. It's 113 ways to have fun with your wife and spark intimacy again. And this guide is going to teach you and your wife. They're going to give you a ton of different ways to have fun. So that's totally free for you. Listen, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to have the link in the comment section below. But if you're listening on audio, just hit up dadnationco.com/remedy for this free guide for you. Listen, I believe in the marriage model. I believe in you and your wife. You can do this. I'm rooting for you. All right, let's get back to the episode. Now I want to move on to point number 2 for today's episode, and that is how to stop things from blowing up, okay? So put yourself into a situation where You're having a conversation, and you've probably been there. I know you've been there. You can feel the conversation kind of start to shift, and then you can start to feel yourself getting frustrated, agitated, or you can feel that with your spouse as well. At this point in time, I want to give you a couple tools that you can use to stop it from escalating, okay? Number one, this is something you can do physically, and this is called the 4-7-8 breathing exercise. We talked a little bit about this in this episode with James McLeod. We didn't get this specific, but he talked about the power of the breath. But essentially, you need to know that there's some huge benefits to slowing down your breath and taking deep breaths, even in a moment of conflict or taking a break. So mindful breathing practices like this one, the 4-7-8 breathing, can produce what the Harvard cardiologist Dr. Herbert Benson called the relaxation response. And so you have a natural stress response that's designed to help you deal with dangerous situations, right? You've heard of the phrase fight or flight. And this fight or flight response can help you survive, but can take a toll on your health when it's overused for everyday stresses. And unfortunately, this is what happens. Many people spend too much time in this state of fight or flight, and their systems are constantly being flooded with cortisol, which is certainly not a good thing. And it's not a good thing because this stress response suppresses your immune system and can actually cause other health problems like high blood pressure, depression, and anxiety. And so this breathing and relaxation technique interrupts this stress response with a profound sense of rest. And there are a bunch of benefits to this breathing exercises and any other deep breathing exercises, like reduced anxiety, lowered blood pressure, improved sleep, improved concentration. There's a bunch of stuff which we could get into at another time, but for now, just know that there's a ton of benefits to this. And so how does the 4-7-8 breathing technique work? Okay. So this breathing technique helps calm your body by activating your parasympathetic nervous system, okay? So your body's automatic functions, such as your heartbeat and your digestion, are controlled by your autonomic nervous system, all right? This system has two parts, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. All right, I know I'm geeking out a little bit, but hang in here with me. The sympathetic nervous system controls your body's stress response. The parasympathetic nervous system controls your body's rest and relaxation response. And so when you activate one of these, you suppress the other. This is why deep breathing is so effective at causing the relaxation response. So how do you do it? Okay, this is going to be really simple for you, okay? You can practice the 4-7-8 breathing anywhere at any time. And when you're first learning, try to practice it a couple times a day. You don't always have to do it in the moment when you're having conflict. It could be just a great habit to get into when you start off your day and before you go to bed. I mean, start with once or twice a day, but you can do it as often as you want. So number one, find a comfortable place to sit down with your back straight, okay? Then I want you to place your tongue against the back of your teeth and keep it there. And then I want you to exhale completely through your mouth, around your tongue, making a whoosh sound. Okay. Then I want you to close your lips and inhale through your nose for a count of 4. And then I want you to hold your breath for a count of 7. And then exhale completely through your mouth, making a whoosh sound for a count of 8. Just like that. That completes one cycle of the 4-7-8 breathing technique. Okay, now you could do that 3 times, so 4 times in total. Do this exercise once or twice a day. But particularly in the context of conflict, when you feel yourself getting frustrated or angry at your wife or your kids, whatever, I want you to just take a beat, okay? Just calmly ask them, listen, I think I need some space. Can I take like 5 minutes to think and process about this and then come back to this conversation? And take the 5 minutes, do these 4 cycles, and I promise you, you're going to be so much more calm. And the reason why this also works is because obviously it lowers your blood pressure, lowers your stress responses, gets you out of fight or flight. But the cool thing about this is it also practically creates space between the action and your reaction, right? And sometimes as husbands and fathers, we can reduce a lot of conflict if simply all we do is create more space from that action or that offense and our reaction. Sometimes that's all we need to do is create space. And that's why this breathing exercise works well. If nothing else, it just creates space between that action and reaction so you can just chill out a little bit and think about what you're about to say. And another thing I want you to think about is I want you to learn to observe your physical cues, okay? And that's because our emotions often manifest physically. So in other words, we often have physical tells, that we're getting irritated, we're getting stressed, we're getting angry. And it's important to know what these physical cues are so that your outsides can inform you as to what's going on the inside, okay? And the funny thing about this is you may not even know, but you might have this conversation with your wife and she might be able to tell you exactly what you do because she's the one that's standing outside of you and watching you when you get frustrated. A lot of men talk about their face getting flush, face getting hot, getting a tight chest, feeling their pulse, in their body. For example, me, like I start rubbing my hands together like this when I get frustrated. And so when my wife sees me doing that, she knows that maybe this is a sign that we just need to take a pause and have a conversation or just take 5 minutes to calm down and gather our thoughts. All right, so that's number one tip for how to avoid conflict when you feel your temperature rising, okay? The 4-7-8 breathing exercise. Number two is called the R.A.I.N method, okay? Now, I mentioned this in this episode with James, I believe. It might have been episode number 6 or number 7. But I just quickly talked about it. But basically, this is a method to allow you to process your feelings in the moment. So the next time your wife triggers you, or maybe your kids aren't listening, or maybe your boss just like pisses you off, whatever the case is, I want you to remember the R.A.I.N acronym, okay? And work through it in your mind. And here is what it stands for, okay? So number one is R. That stands for recognize, okay? So in the moment, I want you to simply recognize and acknowledge your feelings in the moment. Stop and recognize the reality of what's happening around you and that your emotions are elevated. You're basically just admitting the reality of what's going on, okay? Number two, allow. This is where you lean into your thoughts and your feelings, where you have to accept them and you have to tell them that it's okay to feel this way. You give yourself permission to accept and allow these feelings, okay? Number three is investigate. Now that you've recognized the situation, now that you've allowed and acknowledged your feelings, now you can investigate your thoughts. And this is where it gets really practical, okay? Like I just mentioned, check how your feelings are affecting your body physically. Is it making your face hot? Is it making your head throb? Is it making your chest buzzy? Check in with yourself and identify how these feelings are affecting you. And number four, which is N, and that's non-identification, okay? And this is the most crucial step. This is the part where you remind yourself that just because you are feeling angry, jealous, fearful, or whatever, this doesn't make you an angry or fearful person, right? These are just feelings. These are just emotions. And emotions are not good or bad. They're just signals. It's information telling you something. So do not identify with this and make assumptions about how you feel, because what happens is we can then begin to judge our feelings, where we can think about those feelings and have feelings about those feelings. So for example, we can get caught up into the trap of, well, now I'm angry at my wife, but now I'm angry at myself because I'm always getting angry at my wife. And so we stack emotions and we just get sent into a spiral of emotions. And so don't identify with that. Just acknowledge it, identify that it's simply just information, and move forward. This is going to allow you to consciously realize that this moment will pass and that it does not define you. So then you can be free to release the power of these emotions and these feelings and decide how you will respond to them. And remember, this sounds really simple. These are simple tools, but that doesn't mean that it's easy, right? So remember to give yourself grace, because sometimes you're going to nail it and sometimes you are totally going to miss the mark and forget all this stuff altogether. But you will get better with practice, Okay, but the challenging thing about this is the only way you can practice it is by being in situations where there is potential for conflict. And that's kind of the catch-22, right? So it's going to take some time, but mindfulness, emotional awareness takes time and practice. So remember, extend lots of grace to yourself, extend lots of grace to your spouse as you guys figure this out. Okay, and the third thing I want you to think about, and this is just a simple sidebar, is the principle of love and respect. You see, along with a clash of core values, almost every argument can be traced down into a feeling of being either not loved or not being respected. And the premise of all of this is really just that, and generally speaking, a woman needs to feel loved more than anything else. And men need to feel respected more than anything else. So at one point when we were going through therapy earlier on in our marriage, the therapist asked us this question: would you rather hear the words, "I love you," or "I respect you"? And it was just a game-changing moment. It was one of those light bulb moments for me where I thought, I would rather hear the words, "I respect you." And there's just something about how we're wired, right? Men are real passionate about how to provide, how to protect, preside, all those different things. And so generally for me, when my wife says, "I respect you so much as a husband, I'm so thankful for how hard you work. I think you're an incredible man. You're a great father." A lot of this vernacular of respectful words, and that really resonates with me. Whereas, and it really doesn't mean a lot to her, where language for her might be, "I love you, I'm with you, I appreciate you so much," different things like that. So, and when I think back to our marriage and in the fights that we've had, so many times where I've been really frustrated and really angry was when I felt disrespected in some way or another. And so many times when Sam and I have had conflict and she's been upset, it has been a result of me doing or saying something that made her feel unloved, or she wasn't feeling loved or cherished or anything like that. So the big takeaway is simply, in this concept of love and respect, is that women need to feel loved, men need to feel respected. And of course, I say that with the caveat that this is a generalization. Of course, there are some men who don't necessarily value they don't value respect as much as, the typical guy. And of course, on the flip side, there are also women who really appreciate respect, sometimes more than love. And so, of course, this is generalizations, but for the most part, this is what I've experienced to be true. And with the men that I've walked with, they have experienced to be true for them as well. Okay, so now let's move on to what happens if you've totally missed it and you and your wife had a big blow up. Your house is just a giant dumpster fire and you have no hot clue what to do. Okay. In the case that you totally, missed the R.A.I.N acronym, that you didn't do the breathing thing and you just kind of came in and blew up and pieced out, you're in a situation now where you need to make amends with your wife. Okay. We're going to talk about 3 tools that you can use to come back together and be united again. So we got 3. 1 is talk about it. Number 2 is question it. Number 3 is write about it. Okay. These are 3 different approaches. Number 1, talk about it. So this is called the story I'm telling myself. And I think this might be from Brene Brown. I can't quite remember, but this is a great tool to use because of the reason why we get upset is because when we hear something from our wife or she hears something from us, we rarely take the words at face value. We take the words that we heard and fit them into the narrative that's already going on inside of our heads. You see, unfortunately, our spouse can't read our mind, and therefore she can't possibly know how you're interpreting her words real time. So when you come back after you've been offended and you've said something, using this framework, it can go as simple as this. The story I'm telling myself is that. And then you can go on to explain how you're interpreting her words. And this will help her understand how you've received and interpreted her words and allow the both of you to course correct after you've had some conflict. Okay, so here's a couple examples. So number 1, this happened to me. So your wife might say, "I wish you didn't work so much. You're never here when I need you." Maybe you've been in that situation. Now, a husband in that situation could easily feel triggered because he's working his butt off to provide for the family. Maybe he's working a couple jobs and he's just like all in. And this is one of the main ways that he cares for and loves his family is through his work. So in that situation, you can say, when you say that, the story I'm telling myself is that you don't appreciate how hard I work to provide for this family. Is that story true? And then your wife would probably say, oh, I'm sorry, of course not. I just want to spend more time with you because I love you and you add so much to this family. Another example, your wife might say something like, why don't you ever talk about how you feel or talk about your feelings with me? Being married to you is like being married to a robot. Maybe you've heard that before. I know I've heard that before. So don't worry about it if you've heard it. Been there. You could respond with something like, hey, honey, the story I'm telling myself when I hear that is you don't enjoy being married to me and that I need to be emotional and soft just to make you happy. And of course, the wife is going to hear that because that's not what she intended to say. And she might say something like, I didn't mean that at all. It just makes me feel more comfortable and understood when you share that you also have feelings, fears, and worries. I appreciate when you're transparent with me because it makes me feel more connected to you. And that's most of the time probably what she meant. But of course, we interpret it in our framework with our insecurities, our core values, and we completely misconstrue what is actually being said. So the story I'm telling myself, all right, that's number one, talk about it. Number two, question it. So maybe you're not the kind of person that likes to talk it out right away. Maybe you need to go away and take some space. And if that's the case, when you guys get in a fight and the resolution seems to be unclear, I want you to make a deal that you're going to both go out and find a quiet place to think. And I want you both to ask yourselves the question, what have I done to contribute to this situation that we are arguing about? However small, we've both made errors. And so I need to find out exactly what my error was. So ask yourself that question honestly. And this works because if you genuinely ask yourself, it must truly mean that you want the answer. The thing is you won't like learning that answer because we all want to be right and we want our actions to be justified. But by asking the question and genuinely seeking the answer, we reconsider ourselves and our role to play in this. We're humbled, and then we can come back and have that conversation. It also gives us space, as I mentioned before. It's exhausting, honestly, and it's humbling, but I promise you it's worth it every time. Another question you can ask yourself in that moment with the first question is, do I want to be right or do I want peace in my home? And that is a question you need to write on a mirror, stick it on your computer monitor. Do I want to be right or do I want peace in my home? And trust me, my friend, it is so important that you choose peace. And remember, you don't get peace by being right. You just get to be right. And while your partner gets to be wrong and defeated. You do that 1,000 times and your marriage will be over. All right? So pay attention to those questions and learn to ask them. They're humbling. They're not fun, but they will force you to put your ego aside and eat a slice of humble pie and come back and pursue peace with your spouse. All right, so we've got talk about it, question it. Number 3, we've got write about it. Maybe you're here and you're a writer and that's how you process your emotions. Maybe you're here and you struggle with anger and you really struggle to keep your cool. This is going to be something that works really well for you. The next time you get angry about something, take the 5 minutes, take the breath, cool down, walk away. But when you take the space, I want you to grab a piece of paper and I want you to physically write out what made you upset on that piece of paper. Maybe you just want to write it on a flashcard or a notepad, whatever it is, but physically write it out with a pen. And then I want you to go into the living room or go into the kitchen, sit down with your wife, and I want you to place that card on the table. And here's the next part. I want you to sit down with your wife shoulder to shoulder, okay? And I want you to put the card in front of you. And the reason why is this is a psychological tactic that physically postures you both together and facing the problem in front of you. And then I want you to discuss it calmly, okay? 95% of the time, this problem that you had is going to vaporize before you get too far into the conversation. And so that's your 3 tactics for how to resolve conflict when things have already kind of blown up. And the great thing about these 3 things is they don't just work with your spouse, they can work with your kids, they can work with any other key relationship in your life as well. All right, if you're still with me, my friend, kudos to you. So far, we've talked about our core values, why they're important, and how to discover our core values. We've talked about how to prevent conflict from coming up, how to address it before things get too far. And then we've talked about 3 tactics that you can use to resolve conflict if it has blown up and your kitchen is a dumpster fire, how to come back and make amends with your wife and be reunited. All right, the last thing I want to share with you today is a little bit of a bonus for you. And this is what I just call the perfect apology. And now, why are we talking about apologies? Because there is power in an apology. Okay, an apology is something that costs nothing to give, but your relationship has everything to gain. But if apologies are so helpful, why is it so difficult to squeeze those words out from behind your teeth in a tense moment? And well, there's a few reasons why, right? Number one, most of us were never actually taught how to apologize in life. And number two, a lot of us men have been raised to think that real men don't apologize. And I'm going to tell you, if that's what your thought process is, that's a flaming pile of trash, okay? Number three, an apology does require us to put our pride aside and have the humility to ask for forgiveness. Number four is we all have a different idea as to what a good apology looks like. Some people think it's just saying sorry, while others require a lot more. And so there's no industry standard for an apology, right? This is why we have such a difficult time because, again, depending on your upbringing, depending on how you were raised, that looks different for everybody. And here's another tricky part, is there's a high likelihood that you learn to apologize from your parents. And while that can be a good thing, it also means that if they didn't apologize to one another, you weren't taught how to, okay? That's a lot of people's situations. But it's critical that we learn how to apologize and learn how to do it well, not just for our marriage, but it's because it's important that we model this for our children as well. In his book, The Things I Wish I Knew Before Becoming a Parent, Dr. Gary Chapman writes this: if you don't learn to apologize, you will handicap your children socially and have a fractured relationship with your spouse. So I think it's fair to say that apologizing isn't easy. It's super tricky because when you finally do harness the humility to be able to do it, there's a high chance that you're not doing it in the way that your spouse or your children will appreciate. And this even further increases your chances of a stage 2 blow up, because then if you apologize and you do it the wrong way, then you're getting angry because you can't even apologize right. Maybe you've been there. I've been there, right? This is why I'm talking about it. But don't worry, my friend. I got you. All right, I'm going to hook you up. So here are a couple tips on the do's and don'ts of apologizing, and I got something else for you, okay? So when you are apologizing, use the words "I'm sorry" instead of "I apologize." Now, it's a subtle tweak to the verbiage, the vernacular, but the words "I'm sorry" are just more intimate and they're more personal. "I apologize" is a little bit more of a formal, less intimate phrase. "I apologize" is probably something you'd read over a work email, but saying "I'm sorry" is something that's just a little bit more personal. And I promise you it's going to be received much better if you say "I'm sorry" than "I apologize" at home. It's a small thing, but it's a helpful thing, okay? Number two is the absolute apology killer is "I'm sorry, but." "I'm sorry, but" is not an apology. Take the word "but" out of the apology. When we use the word "but," it's implying that we're not actually taking full responsibility for our actions and our words, and we're still blaming. "I'm sorry, but" just makes the other person feel like they were still in the wrong, even though you're apologizing. You see that disconnect? And that can be really agitating for somebody who's expecting an apology because it still kind of feels like you're dumping it on them. But as I promised, I have good news for you. I've crafted the perfect apology, okay? And I even made it into a really simple acronym for you to remember. And that acronym is S.O.R.R.Y, S-O.R.R.Y, okay? So the first, obviously, is the letter S, and that stands for say sorry. Okay, so you just start off by saying you're sorry and express specifically what you're sorry for, okay? So you might say something like this: "Listen, honey, I'm so sorry that I raised my voice at you earlier today. You didn't deserve that." Okay? Number one, say sorry. Number two, take ownership, okay? Take ownership of your mistake and do not blame anyone else. Because remember, An apology means taking ownership of what you did wrong, full stop. So you might say, hey, honey, I'm so sorry that I raised my voice at you. That was wrong and I shouldn't have done that. Or there was no excuse for that. I accept full responsibility. Okay, ownership. Number 3 is restitution, right? And this is where you offer to make things right. And for some people, if you do not offer to right your wrong, you haven't sincerely apologized. So the next part of that apology might be, what can I do to make things right between us? What can I do to make this easier for you to forgive me? So, phrasing this together, hey, honey, I'm so sorry for raising my voice at you earlier today. You didn't deserve that. There was no excuse for that, and I accept full responsibility. What can I do to make things right between us? What can I do to make it easier for you to forgive me? The 4th step is for repentance, okay? Now, a repentance expresses your desire to change and a commitment to do so. Repentance is kind of like an old school word that generally means a sincere commitment to personal change. And it's a promise or a resolve not to repeat the offense. So it could sound something like this. I don't like what I did and I don't want to do it again. Or this is what I'm going to do now so that I will remember for next time. So adding that to this apology, hey, honey, I'm so sorry I yelled at you earlier today. I was wrong and I should not have done that. There's no excuse for it. What can I do to make things right between us? Because I don't like what I did and I don't want to do it again. And number 5, which is why, that simply stands for yield, okay? Where you yield to the person, you submit, and you ask for forgiveness. This communicates that you really value the relationship and that you want to continue having a healthy one. So what that looks like in a sentence form is, I was wrong. Will you forgive me? Or I hurt you and what I did was wrong. Please forgive me. So putting it all together. Hey, honey, I'm so sorry that I yelled at you earlier today. There was no excuse for that, and I accept full responsibility. What can I do to make things right between us? Because I don't like what I did, and I really don't want to do this again. I was wrong, and I hurt you. Will you forgive me? So this model for apologizing is fairly holistic, and it considers all things in the context of what should be spoken in an apology. And so I hope that tool is helpful for you. And again, I've put the link to this PDF of this acronym in the show notes, and it's all under that Reflections and Resources link. That's going to take you to a Google Drive where you can download it, print it off, and stick it somewhere, maybe on your mirror or on your computer monitor, so that you can familiarize yourself with this process and you can learn to give genuine, thoughtful, and thorough apologies. All right? I promise you, my friend, this is going to be a big help for when you miss the mark and drop the ball. And if you're listening to this and you feel like, man, that language just feels uncomfortable for me. Maybe you're not used to apologizing. Maybe you came from an environment where your parents didn't apologize. You were never taught. If it feels like it's going to be hard to do, it's okay. It is for a lot of people. And that's because the language is just unfamiliar, because that language is unpracticed. And this might sound silly, but if you want to get better at it, I want you to actually practice apologizing in the mirror. Okay, it sounds silly, but you actually have to practice speaking these sentences so that they feel more comfortable in your mouth, right? Otherwise, when you try to do this in a scenario, you're probably going to keep clamming up, or maybe it won't feel authentic because it'll feel too scripted, right? So practice it. I come from the world of performance. I studied vocal performance. And so I'm very well aware of the fact that, or if you're giving a performance and you want to connect with the audience, you have to practice on that stage before people show up. You have to practice in front of the mirror. You have to observe your facial expressions and your hand motions and all those different things. And so this is no different, okay? And I'm going to put a little plug in here because if you've enjoyed the content in this episode, there's a lot more where this came from, okay? This is a snippet of what's in my free marriage course called Remodel Your Marriage. And in that course, we talk about the 4 foundations that every successful couple, every healthy marriage is built on. That's how to love, how to feel or how to communicate how you feel, how to fight, and how to have fun. And so if you're watching this and your marriage could simply use some refreshing, or maybe your marriage is just hanging on by a thread and needs a whole new remodel, This course is going to help you understand how to love your wife better, how to keep your cool, and get the fire back in your marriage. Okay, inside this course, you're going to find video teachings, a ton of resources like you learned today that you're going to be able to use to spark intimacy, connect with your wife on a deeper level than ever before. And why is all this so important? Because marriage is one of the most important things you need to focus on in your life, especially if you have kids. Because we know that life lessons are often caught, not just taught, right? So the best thing that you can do for your kids is to model a healthy, loving, and thriving relationship. Now, why is that? I want you to hear me say this, because the husband that you are right now will be the husband that your son grows up to be. The husband that you are right now is the husband that your daughter is going to look for when she grows up. So the question becomes, are you the man that you want your son to be? Or are you the kind of husband that you would want your daughter to have one day? If not, it's time to get to work, all right? These are questions I'm asking myself all the time. And it's so important that we pause, we do the work to be the men that we need to be for our family. All right, so as we wrap up this episode, my hope is that you've learned today that conflict is normal, that conflict is healthy, and that we all have core values. And it's important to understand where we align and where we differ in our values with our spouses. I hope you've learned the importance of breath control and practicing mindfulness to prevent a blow up. And I hope that you've learned these 3 practical tips that you can use to communicate through conflict and make up with your wife. And I hope that you've learned about the importance of apologies and how to apologize well when you need to in your key relationships. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I've generated a list of reflection questions for you to consider with all that you've learned today. So again, hit that same link, and that's going to take you to that reflection and resources Google Doc, where you're going to find some reflection questions that you can download. And you can work through these questions carefully and thoughtfully. Because remember, writing is thinking. That's how we get more clarity. I love this quote from David McClellow. He says, writing is thinking, and to write well is to think clearly. That's why it's so hard to think clear sometimes. So if you really want to see breakthrough, if you really want to implement this, I want you to download these resources, okay? Download the S.O.R.R.Y PDF, download the core values discovery tool, download these reflection questions and work through them with your spouse as well. Invite her into this journey, because marriage is a two-way street. And I promise you that if you put in the work, your marriage is going to be on a whole new level, all right? And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, as always, I want you to leave a comment below, okay? What was your big insight that you're taking away today? And let's start the conversation, because I want to know that this is impacting you as much as it has impacted me in my marriage over the years, okay? Hope this was powerful for you. And I just, again, want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve you as best as I can. If you want to connect with me, hit me up on Instagram at DadNationCo, or you can just send me an email at mitchell@dadnationco.com. As always, listen, I'm here for you. I believe in you. I'm in your corner, okay? Have an amazing day. We'll catch up next week.